sure my mic is turned on here. If for some reason my mic goes dark, let me know. Chapter 1. Dark and dusty. Painted on the sky, misty taste of moonshine. Teardrop in my eye. John Denver. The man stopped dead in his tracks as he caught sight of the campfire. In fact, he wasn't even sure that was indeed what he saw as he made his way over the most recent hill in the countless number of meandering hills on this deserted prairie. He took off his pack, as quiet as he could, so as to not make any significant or recognizable sound, and he placed it on the ground beside his feet. The pack had been weighing him down for the past 2 years, and he already disliked the idea of having to put it back on. This thought went through his head every time he released the physical burden from off his shoulders. He took a seat in the dry prairie grass and pinched off a single blade and stuck one end in his mouth and contemplated his next move. Under the cloak of darkness on an almost barren prairie landscape, nothing can be as mutually reassuring and ominous as the distinct flickering light from a small campfire. Unlike its wild cousin, a campfire is mostly a tamed beast. At least anyone who starts one should know how to tame it. And while any campfire has a little bit of a mystery in its embers, the flames dancing and darting in time to an invisible and improvising conductor, there is always a chance that it may burst free from the symphony and start its own tune amongst the wilderness at any moment. However, a campfire rarely goes astray because of a few basic principles. If it does not have fuel or a way to escape where it is housed, it cannot spread, and over time it will simply fade to ash like the countless campfires before it. For this reason, the home of a campfire is crucial and must maintain a delicate balance with nature. It is a balance between providing sufficient airflow to fuel the coals at the bottom, which give birth to the flames at the top, and a solid structure. It is peaceful as long as it does not leave its enclosure. The enclosure itself can be of a variety of shapes, sizes, and elements. A simple ring of stones can often do the trick and can be dismantled in a pinch to let the earth take back its territory in a short time, and to hide the fact from others that you were even there at all. However, this ring often tempts the fire to want to escape if given the chance, whereas a larger and more permanent structure will let the campfire know it always has a place as long as it doesn't try and escape. Free to stay and burn as long as it is fed, and often allowed to grow larger than it would in its counterpart, the simple ring. If maintained by its creator, a campfire can appear dead to any random passerby, when, in all actuality, it is merely sleeping, lying dormant waiting for its master to feed it and let it flourish. A wildfire, on the other hand, seeks to eat up the substance of everything in its path, destroying both life and limb of anything that gets in its way. It has no master. It does not separate friend from foe. It does not discriminate. In fact, it pays no respect, no matter how much is shown to it. A campfire can provide warmth and even protection to the person who tames and respects it. It can be a beacon to anyone in distress, or anything that sees it to simply leave. A warning sign, a message. Go away. As he sat and stared at the flickering light in the distance, he thought about the journey that had brought him this far. He wondered if he had the strength to continue towards the light that seemed to be waving at him, a random flickering outstretched yellow finger from an open orange palm facing upward. Come this way, the fire said. It'll be just fine. You'll see. Just a little further to go. After all, you've come this far. The man sitting in the grass took a deep breath and exhaled. His breath burst forward full of steam like an old train getting ready to leave the station on another trip down the same worn-out tracks. As the man took another breath, still staring at the beckoning flames and listening to the distant pops of the wood within calling him to come feel its warmth, he noticed something in the air he hadn't felt for quite some time. Cold. He paused before he took another breath. How far can breath be seen, he thought. A moment later, he inhaled the autumn night air once more, fresh but biting. Was summer over, he thought? He hadn't traveled that far in the past several months, or what he had assumed had passed for months. But the days had been warm and even unbearably hot for stretches at a time. If it was still so hot during the day, but this cold at night, perhaps he was closer than he thought. Maybe, he thought as he took another breath and exhaled, maybe I found it after all. Another breath, another exhale, his breath visible once more. A part of him longed for a cigarette. The last few weeks, he had been making better time and covering greater distance each day on his journey. Yes, he thought, summer is coming to a close. He sat there a little while longer, looking at the campfire. Memories came rushing back to him as the distant flames tricked his mind back into another place and a very different time. All kinds of familiar sights and sounds filled the air. The dark cloak covering the horizon burst into glorious sunshine. Around him, the vacant hills he had climbed and descended were now filled with dark oceans of pine and vibrant seas of grass. Pungent, almost bitter odors came riding in off the pine needles in a light breeze. Grasshoppers stampeded through the grass, emerging and immediately disappearing once again in the wild green sea. Crickets chirped, sang, and cast out their calls in a chorus of instinctual mating activity. A slow, methodical crackle could be heard through the grassy plain left in front of him. The sizzle and spit of bacon fed the fire in the cast iron pan above it. The flames continued to beckon the man, their outstretched yellow fingers always motioning to him to keep moving on, to get up. The man, so entranced by these vivid memories, even wiped his salivating mouth. But it was the feel of his tired, cold hands over the unkempt whiskers on his face and the rough texture of his dry, cracked lips that struck him back to the hard reality all around him. And just like that, the glorious sun was replaced by the dark once more. Only the little light of the campfire 100 yards off, that was still urging him on, could be seen. "Damn," the man said quietly aloud. "This is the whole reason I came here." And with that, he felt the cold of the night inch a little closer and decided it was now or never. He had simply come too far to stop now or turn back. He rose to his feet and put his burdensome pack back on. It now felt heavier than ever before, and he wondered if he was really up to going the final few yards. He tried to walk. Nothing happened. His legs didn't move, and he glanced down to see that they were still there. He looked back at the flames in the distance and thought, no more. He convinced himself he couldn't complete the last steps of a journey he never imagined he would have taken just a few years earlier. One he was never certain he could complete once he started. His eyes began to water, and he threw back his head as if to try and keep the tears at bay. Through the gloss of his watery eyes, he saw a faint light in the night sky. A twinkling light. He couldn't believe what he was seeing and blinked several times to clear his vision. It had played tricks on him before. It was as if the very action of blinking, was somehow controlling the sky. Was this another trick, he pondered? Is it real? With each blink of his watery eyes, the ever-present cloud began to clear, and the twinkling light he saw turned into 2 twinkling lights, then 4, then 8, and so on exponentially with each passing moment. It happened so fast. It got to the point that he could no longer count the emerging lights, but that didn't keep him from trying. A smile exploded onto his face, and he was so overcome with joy that he didn't even notice the pain as new cracks joined old ones on his parched lips. He gasped, "Look at it," in a whisper as if he was worried to disturb the beautiful celestial light show that was unfolding before his eyes. He continued to count the long, lost stars until his count faded into naming the forgotten constellations of his youth. As he did so, he failed to notice the large clap of lightning and rumbling thunder in the clouds clearing out of the prairie fields. He failed to notice that his legs were moving forward once more. They were taking him to the campfire. The horse whinnied gently as the clouds began to roll off the prairie to the west, a call to its master to look to the sky and see what had been looking down on them from above but had been hidden for far too long. The smell of a coarse stew started to fade. Dinner had been cooking for several hours, and the cowboy had even let him have a little taste of it. After dinner, the cowboy would surely settle in for the night, thought the horse. He had become very set in his ways over time, but the sky was changing. There was something new in the air that night. The horse whinnied softly once more. The cowboy had been sitting on his regular seat by the fire for several hours, summoning up the strength like he did every night for what seemed like an eternity. Up until this point, it never seemed to find him. In his hand was a single bullet. He rolled it over and over again with his calloused hands, studying it and speaking to it without words. He took out a handkerchief from his shirt pocket and methodically polished the bullet. It was probably plenty good and ready, but he continued to polish it like the night before, and the night before that. Habit, he thought to himself, purely out of habit, but tonight will end differently. This place out on the prairie had been his home for nearly 3 years now, and yet nothing about it felt like home. The large stump of a log he sat on had been smoothed and polished from years of sitting by the fire and staring into its flames. On the other side of the fire was an equally sized log, which he had stared at just as intently as the fire over the years. Unlike the one he sat on, it was rough and weathered by the wind and nature's elements rather than human form. The cowboy had never even bothered to sit on it, and often wondered why he had even placed another one by the fire in the first place. His shelter and sleeping quarters were one and the same, an old canvas tent with large triangular flaps at the opening. It had an opening on one side of its fabric roof for a stovepipe, but he had sewed it shut the first year as he had been unable to find a wood-burning stove that was capable of being hauled all the way out here, even with his horse doing most of the work. And it wasn't like the wood was even as abundant or as easy to harvest as you would think. The horse was still healthy, but it was getting older, and each passing season it could handle fewer and fewer heavier jobs. For that matter, the same was true for him. He had run a clothesline between the few trees that were present in this little campsite to hang his clothes on, and in fact a few articles of clothes hung from them in the dark like ominous shadows hovering behind him, always looking over his shoulder. They danced and mocked him on a nightly basis, reminding him that he was forever alone. Depending on the day, the forms changed shape and location. However, they always mocked. For a while that first year, he had actually spoken to them and cursed them for judging him behind his back. As time passed, they simply returned to being clothes on a line. The only thing he talked to anymore was the horse. He didn't even talk to himself anymore. It was pointless. Every conversation he ever needed to have with himself about how he came to be out here and what he needed to do about it had been made long ago. As he sat there rubbing the bullet over and over again with the handkerchief, he was as sure as he'd ever been that everything he needed to say to the horse had already been said as well. The only voice he needed to hear was in his head, and even that was about to be made silent once and for all. The cowboy reached down to the saddlebag beside his log and withdrew a large revolver that was housed within its leather walls. As he retrieved it, the silver metal shimmered in the light from the light of the fire. The old 6.5 Smith & Wesson 44 caliber looked brand new in comparison to everything around it, the dead landscape. The rifle he had used for hunting was still alive and could be found remained dormant in his tent. He had run out of ammunition for it months ago. The revolver was a different story. The cowboy had cleaned the revolver every single day since his arrival to this campsite, and although he had been down to a single bullet for quite some time, he had made sure to keep it in pristine order for the final shot it would ever take. He set the bullet down carefully next to him on the log and took the handkerchief out and wiped the revolver down one last time. He may not have been the best at dealing with difficult situations in the past, but he was determined that this one would be dealt with down to the smallest of details. After wiping down the gun for what seemed like an eternity, carefully removing any greasy smudges or fingerprints, he returned the handkerchief to his breast pocket on his shirt and opened the cylinder and pointed the gun at the fire so he could see clearly through each of the 6 chambers. He forcefully blew air through the first chamber and turned the cylinder to the next opening. Click, blow, turn. Click, blow, turn. Click, blow, turn. Click, blow, turn. Click, blow. He paused after that last forceful blow. He brought the chamber even closer to his eyes and peered through it into the fire. He lowered it back down and gave it one last forceful blow for good measure to make sure it was indeed ready. He had questioned the point of even bothering with the other chambers, but he didn't want the smallest problem to mess with his plan's execution. Without even looking to his side or lowering the gun, he reached over with his free hand and picked up the bullet. As he raised it up to meet its partner for the briefest of moments, one could see that the bullet had been as equally cared for as the revolver. A perfect pair. He had saved them both all these years for this very moment when it finally came to him. Together they were spotless and ready to be put into action when called upon. The cowboy loaded the gun into the twice-cleared chamber and pushed the cylinder back into position. The cowboy thought to himself, "It's time." He paused for a moment and questioned whether he should say something to the horse. He decided against it, and in that decision overlooked the small but hardly insignificant fact that he had left the horse hobbled. It would be able to go nowhere once he was gone. It too would die, but in comparison to his own, it would be a slow and painful death. These are the kinds of details one manages to pass over no matter how many checkpoints were established, when focused solely on their own arrangements. He rotated the cylinder to position the bullet. Turn. Click. The wind had picked up and a chill had swept into the camp. He felt the warmth of the tears from his eyes roll down his face. Before he had time to notice, they were chilled by the cold breeze, dried up on his cheeks and dead, like so much of the world around him. The cowboy closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and put the revolver to his temple. "I'll do it when I exhale," he thought. He held his breath. His foot began to tap. His hand began to tremble, and the cold barrel of the gun on his forehead began to burn. He exhaled. The night remained quiet, other than the crackling fire and the soft whispers of the wind. The gun lowered to his lap. As it did, he hung his head down to his chest and began to sob. He had cleaned the gun and bullet every night and still couldn't find the strength to just pull the trigger. "Enough of this," he said loudly in his own head. "Enough!" And in a rush he raised his head, huffed and puffed, and jammed the cold barrel of the gun under his chin, forcing his eyes closed to the heavens. He took several quick breaths and put his finger on the trigger and began to squeeze. A loud bang pierced the night, and all the cowboy could see was bright, white light for the briefest of moments. The horse whinnied loud and stamped its feet on the cold, hard ground. It did not like lightning nor the thunder that had always followed it. "Settle down now. Just thunder now. Relax," said the cowboy as he began to lower the gun as he prepared to try once more. "Just when I don't need a miracle," he thought, "here comes one to keep me from pulling the damn trigger, when in any other given situation a thunderclap like that would have made me jump and fire off a round wherever it happened to be pointing at the time. Go figure." The horse whinnied softly once more, a sound of concern. "Just relax now," he said once again to the horse, which was still a bit spooked, as he raised the gun under his chin once more and looked to the sky again one last time. However, this time with eyes wide open. "Ain't a damn cloud in the sky," he added with the last words barely making it out of his mouth. "No," he thought, it can't be. Would you look at that?" His chapped lips all of a sudden hurt, and he felt a hint of warmth as they lightly bled from a few cracks as he scanned the sky. If he'd been able to look in a mirror at that very moment, he would have known exactly why. He was smiling. Without taking his eyes off of the sky, he lowered the revolver, opened the cylinder, and turned it. Click. He tilted the gun and dropped the bullet into the palm of his other hand and placed it in the pocket of his shirt along with the handkerchief already housed there. "Well, I'll be goddamned," he said to himself. while turning to look at the horse a few yards off in the darkness. You see there? Ain't a goddamn cloud in the sky. How long it's been, you figure? Look, see, there's the Big Dipper, and that means... He trailed off with more and more stars filling the night sky as the clouds opened up and abandoned the night sky on the prairie. Yep, there's Polaris, he said to the horse in triumph. I told you we're that way. Last time I take directions from a horse. The cowboy took his eyes off the sky for the shortest of seconds to return the gun to the saddlebag. In fact, he never really took his eyes off the sky, as his first attempt at putting the Smith & Wesson in the bag left the pristine revolver dusty and laying in the dirt. He grabbed the revolver and put it in the bag without a thought in the world about how he'd apparently wasted all that time maintaining its cleanliness. His thoughts were on the stars, and so were the horses, as it returned his verbal jab with a whinny and a snort as if to tell the cowboy he had better watch his tongue. Ah, hush up, you old pile of glue, the cowboy added as he returned to gazing at the stars. Now look, all right, I'm going to teach you about them stars a bit. Pausing before moving on, he let his eyes wander the giant black canvas filled with dots of light, studying where to start his lecture. Although his arm never moved, he could feel himself reaching for the stars, wanting to grab one and hold on to it in case the clouds swept back into the prairie and swallowed them up once again. He took a deep breath, slowly exhaling, and began the horse's education on the constellations that mankind had been staring at for its entire existence until just a few years ago. Those few years had seemed like a lifetime. He pointed to one gathering of twinkling lights in the sky and looked at the horse to make sure his student was paying attention. That there's Orion's belt, he said. His voice cracked a bit, hoarse from such long inactivity. He felt his throat grab a little and wondered how long it had actually been since he had spoken before this night it began. That middle one, he continued, the brightest one, is Alnilam, or Epsilon Orionis to the uneducated equines such as yourself. I read somewhere once that it were something like 1,300 light years away. He paused, clearing his throat to break up the weeks of inactivity, and then spoke words he had memorized a long time ago and yet came to him with great ease at this moment in time. Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. Upon finishing the memorized lines, the cowboy paused and then slowly motioned his hand in a sign of the cross for the first time in years, before adding, "Forgive me, Father." The horse whinnied, almost as if asking the cowboy a question. That ain't Whitman, you old flea bag. He couldn't help but smile and laughed at the horse as he returned his gaze back to the stars, looking for more familiar clusters of light. Aha! He exclaimed. And over there is Cassiopeia. You see, once upon a time she were a queen in Ethiopia. The cowboy stood up, perhaps in an attempt to get closer to the stars, but most likely to cut out the light from the fire's glow so the stars would be even more visible. His feet led him to wander around the campsite, searching for the best view. As they did, he continued to lecture the horse on the wonders of space and ancient mythologies. He paused upon finding the ideal viewing spot, looked at the horse and then back to the sky and continued, Not that he ever been there or nothing. See, she's up there in them stars as a punishment. Made the mistake of comparing her daughter's beauty to Hera, that's Zeus's wife, how the Greeks tell it. Well, Hera were none too pleased with that, so she banished Cassiopeia to them stars, and there she stays to this here day. He paused once more before emphatically finishing this particular history lesson. Women. The horse neighed, a sign of disapproval. The cowboy didn't seem to even notice as he rolled right into the next constellation he could remember from his boyhood studies of astrology with his father. Studies that had mostly been done on the same prairies he stood on this cool, clear evening. And over there's Pegasus, he began saying. Better horse than you can be sure of that. Out of nowhere, low rolling thunder could be heard out in the distance, opposite of the horse's direction. It was in the east, which the cowboy should have noticed was a little off, seeing as how the storm had broke to the west. The horse neighed loudly as if it had been hit by lightning. The cowboy looked to the horse and then off to the east from where the thunder had been heard. He studied the darkness, moving to put himself between the fire and what he thought was something he saw moving just outside the camp by perhaps 20 or 30 yards. It was a wonder he could see anything at all, but sure enough, he was right. Something, or better yet, someone was out there and moving toward the camp as far as he could tell. "Shit," he said in the faintest of whispers. He moved slowly back around the fire and sat down by the fire on his well-worn log. As he picked up a stick to poke the fire and catch another glimpse of whoever was out there, he glanced at the saddlebag housing the revolver inside and let his free hand drop close to it so he could hopefully pull it out of the bag undetected as the dark, shadowy figure on the prairie approached the camp. The gun slipped a little in his hands from the dust and had settled on it when the cowboy dropped it in his pursuit of the stars. He adjusted his grip and slowly put his trigger finger in place. And then he remembered that the well-polished bullet was in his breast pocket, not in the gun. And the figure in the dark was only getting closer with each passing second. And that's chapter 1.